Nobody wanted the fat, beggar teen until the mountain man said, "She's the one." The dusty Main Street falls silent as a hungry girl clutches a torn ledger, mocked and shoved aside like dirt under a boot. No one offers bread, no one offers mercy. Then heavy boots strike the boardwalk. A scarred mountain man steps forward, his voice cutting through the jeers. "She's the one. I'll take her." The crowd gasps. Why would a loner risk his life and reputation for the most despised child in town? But hidden in her ragged hands lies more than hunger and shame. A secret powerful enough to change the fate of the valley. A spring of water men would kill to own. The railroad's eyes are watching. Fires will burn. Guns will be drawn. And the truth of her bloodline will shake the church itself. Will she rise from beggar to chosen heir, or be crushed by the very world that scorned her? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The winter wind whistled through Silver Bluff's muddy streets, carrying the sharp bite of approaching night. Steam rose from the flanks of horses tied to hitching posts, their breaths forming cloudy puffs in the frigid air. The saloon's warmth and noise spilled onto the boardwalk through swinging doors, along with the tinkling of a badly tuned piano and rough laughter. Amelia Navarro pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of the general store, trying to make herself smaller despite her size. Her father's ledger, its leather cover cracked and worn, remained clutched tight against her chest like armor. The pages inside held secrets she couldn't unlock. The careful lines and numbers her father had written before the fever took him were as mysterious to her as bird tracks in the snow. Her stomach cramped with hunger, a feeling she'd grown too familiar with these past weeks. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery made her mouth water, but she'd learned how that ended. Still, desperation drove her forward when she spotted the preacher's wife, Mrs. Hampton, stepping out of the store with a basket of goods. "Please, ma'am," Amelia whispered, her voice scratchy from disuse. "Might you spare a crust?" "Mrs." Hampton's face pinched like she'd bitten into something sour. She pulled her shawl tighter and stepped around Amelia as if avoiding a mud puddle. "Really now, child. The mission house takes in your kind twice a week. Don't go bothering decent folk." From the saloon doorway, someone laughed. "Ain't exactly starving, is she?" Heat flooded Amelia's cheeks. She hunched her shoulders, letting her long, dark hair fall forward to hide her face. The ledger's familiar weight against her chest was the only comfort she had left. She couldn't sell it, wouldn't sell it. It was all she had of her father, even if she couldn't read a word. The afternoon light was fading fast, shadows stretching long across the street, when heavy boot steps approached from the direction of the livery. A hush fell over the usual street chatter, the kind of quiet that followed Jonas Hale wherever he went. Amelia had heard whispers about the mountain man, how he lived alone in the high country, how bears feared him more than he feared them, how he hadn't spoken more than 10 words together since his wife died. She didn't dare look up, but she could see his shadow fall across the boardwalk. The man was tall as a pine tree, with shoulders broad as an ox yoke, the kind of man who made others step aside without meaning to. "Hey, Hale," called out Brad Turner, one of the younger ranchers. "Watch this. Been trying to sweep this trash off our streets all week." He kicked a spray of dirty snow toward Amelia, making her flinch. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees as Jonas Hale turned. His voice was like gravel under wagon wheels, quiet but carrying clear across the sudden silence. "That's enough." Just 2 words, but Turner's face went pale. He backed up a step, bumping into the saloon door. "Ah, come on, Hale. She's been hanging around, begging, making the whole town look bad. Someone ought to." "I said enough." Hale moved with the deliberate grace of a man who knew his own strength, placing himself between Amelia and Turner. The last rays of sunlight caught the long scar that ran from his left temple to jaw, a white line against weather-darkened skin. For the first time, Amelia gathered the courage to look up. Hale wasn't looking at Turner anymore. His eyes were on her, dark and deep-set under heavy brows. She clutched the ledger tighter, but didn't look away. Something in his gaze held her. Not pity or disgust like she was used to seeing, but something else. Recognition. Maybe. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her patched dress, the determined set of her chin, the way she protected that worn book. Then he turned to face the growing crowd of onlookers, his voice carrying clear and strong. "She's the one. I'll take her." Gasps rippled through the gathered townsfolk. "Mrs." Hampton dropped her basket, spilling apples across the boardwalk. Someone whispered, "Has old Hale finally lost his mind?" But Hale paid them no mind. He held out one massive hand to Amelia, calloused palm up, waiting. Not grabbing, not demanding, offering. Amelia stared at that hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd seen 16 winters come and go, and in all that time, no one had ever chosen her. Not the mission house, not the church ladies with their charitable smiles, not even her mother's people after her father died. Yet here stood this legend of a man, this mountain shadow, claiming her before God and everyone. Why? The word slipped out before she could stop it, barely more than a whisper. Something softened in Hale's eyes, though his expression barely changed. "Because you're still standing," he said, just as quiet. "Now come on, girl. Night's falling." Amelia looked at his hand again, then at the ledger she held. Her father's voice seemed to whisper from its pages. He'd always told her to trust her gut, to know her own worth, even when others didn't see it. Slowly, carefully, she reached out and placed her hand in Hale's. His fingers closed, gentle but firm around hers, and he helped her to her feet. The touch of another human being, after so long without, nearly brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them back, straightening her spine as best she could. The crowd parted like water as Hale led her down the boardwalk. Behind them, the whispers grew like wind through prairie grass. "Mad as a March hare," someone muttered. "Taking in a half-breed beggar girl. What's he thinking?" But Hale's stride never faltered, and his hand stayed steady around hers. The evening lamps were being lit now, their golden light catching in the falling snow and making halos in the gathering dusk. Amelia followed where he led, holding her father's ledger close with her free hand, feeling for the first time in months like she might have found something solid to stand on. As they reached the edge of town, Hale paused at his wagon. "Got supplies to load," he said, releasing her hand. "You can sit up front if you've a mind to, or you can run. Your choice." Amelia looked back at Silver Bluff, at the warm windows and the familiar misery of its streets. Then she looked at Jonas Hale, this strange, scarred man who had claimed her with 2 simple words. She climbed carefully onto the wagon seat, settling the ledger in her lap. A ghost of a smile touched Hale's mouth as he nodded once, then turned to his loading. The snow fell softer now, dusting Amelia's shoulders and hair with white. She watched it settle on the ledger's cover, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, she realized. Small and fragile as a bird's egg, but hope all the same. The wagon creaked along the snow-covered trail, winding through towering pines that blocked out most of the failing light. Amelia huddled deeper into the rough blanket Jonas had tossed her way before they'd left town. Her stomach growled, but she'd learned to ignore such things. The ledger remained clutched tight in her lap, its familiar weight, an anchor in this strange new world she'd stepped into. After what felt like hours, Jonas pulled the horses to a stop before a small cabin tucked against a hillside. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, dancing silver in the moonlight. It wasn't much to look at, just pine logs stacked neat and tight, with a small covered porch and 2 windows glowing warm with lamplight. "Home," Jonas said simply, jumping down from the wagon. He reached up to help her, his calloused hands steady and strong. "Watch your step. Path gets icy." Amelia followed him up to the cabin door, her legs stiff from the cold ride. When Jonas pushed open the door, warmth from a potbelly stove wrapped around her like a blanket. She stood just inside, taking in the simple space. One room, with a narrow cot pushed against the far wall, iron cooking pots hanging from hooks, and rough wooden shelves lined with tools, traps, and supplies. "Sit," Jonas said, gesturing to a chair by the stove. "You must be hungry." Her eyes followed him as he moved around the small space with practiced ease. He added wood to the stove, pulled out an iron pot and some supplies. Soon, the cabin filled with the smell of heating beans and cornbread warming on the stovetop. Amelia's mouth watered, but she stayed still, perched on the edge of her chair. She'd learned the hard way not to assume anything was meant for her. But when Jonas placed a full plate in her hands, her resolve crumbled. She ate quickly, afraid it might disappear, though she tried to remember her manners. "Slow down," Jonas said, his voice gentler than she'd expected. "There's plenty more." She forced herself to take smaller bites, watching as Jonas settled into the other chair. His eyes fell on the ledger she'd set carefully beside her plate. "Your father's?" he asked. Amelia nodded, swallowing a mouthful of beans. "All I have left of him." Jonas reached for the book, then paused, looking at her. "May I?" Something in his careful asking made her trust him. She nodded again, and he picked up the ledger, handling it with respect. His dark eyes moved across the pages, studying the crude markings and scrawled notes. "You can read it?" she asked, surprised. "Some." Jonas turned another page, his expression thoughtful. "These are prospector's marks. Your father was searching for something specific." "Gold?" Amelia leaned forward despite herself. "He never found any, far as I know." "Not gold." Jonas tapped a particular set of markings. "These here. They're describing a spring, high up in the mountains, flowing year-round from what these notes suggest. That's worth more than gold in these parts." Amelia set down her spoon, frowning. "I don't understand." "Water means everything out here," Jonas explained, still studying the pages. "Especially water that flows steady, even in drought times. Ranchers would pay good money to water their herds. Could change the whole valley, having access to a spring like this." He looked up at her then, his scarred face serious in the lamplight. "That's why you've been carrying this everywhere, isn't it? Even if you couldn't read it, you knew it was important." "Papa made me promise," Amelia said softly. "Right before he died. Said to keep it safe, that it would matter someday." Jonas nodded slowly, closing the ledger with care. He was right, but he was also right to tell you to guard it. Information like this, it can attract the wrong kind of attention. Men who do anything to claim such a spring for themselves. A shiver ran down Amelia's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She thought of the hostile faces in town, the whispers and jeers. Had some of them known? Had they guessed what she carried? "Finish your food," Jonas said, setting the ledger back beside her plate. "You're safe here." Amelia did as she was told, but her appetite had dimmed. When she finished, Jonas showed her where she could wash up, gave her an extra blanket, and told her to rest by the fire. The chair was more comfortable than anywhere she'd slept in weeks, and the warmth of a full belly soon had her drifting off despite her worries. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Jonas move quietly around the cabin, checking locks, banking the fire. He paused at one of the windows, looking out into the night. Something in his stance reminded her of the way her father used to watch the horizon, alert, protective. Just before sleep took her completely, she heard the cabin door open and close softly. In her dreams, she thought she heard Jonas's voice, carried on the winter wind, not his usual gruff tones, but something softer, like a prayer. Outside, Jonas stood on his porch, scanning the moonlit forest. The night was clear and cold, stars sharp as broken glass above the pine tops. His breath frosted in the air as he considered what he'd done, taking in this girl, claiming her before the whole town. It wasn't just charity that had moved him, though the sight of her, proud even in her hunger, had stirred something in his heart he'd thought long dead. No, there was more to it. He'd recognized something in her eyes, a kind of desperate determination he'd seen before, in another face, long ago. His Cherokee wife had worn that same look when the town turned against her, when they'd refused her medicine during the cholera outbreak that took both her and their unborn child. "Lord," he whispered into the night, "give me strength to do right by this one, to protect what you've put in my path." The wind sighed through the pines, bringing with it the lonely cry of a distant coyote. Jonas knew he'd drawn attention today. The wrong kind of attention. Men like Brad Turner wouldn't let this go easily, especially now that he'd shamed them in public. And if anyone in town suspected what that ledger contained, he touched the scar on his face, remembering how he'd earned it standing up against injustice before. The cost had been high, but he'd do it again. Some things were worth fighting for. With one last look at the silent forest, Jonas turned back to his cabin. Through the window, he could see Amelia sleeping peaceful by the fire, the ledger still within arm's reach. Whatever came, he'd made his choice. God had put her in his path for a reason, and he aimed to see it through. Dawn broke crisp and clear over Jonas's cabin, the mountain air bit sharp, making Amelia pull her thin jacket closer as she climbed into Jonas's wagon. Her stomach was full from a breakfast of hot porridge, the second real meal she'd had in weeks. The wooden seat creaked as Jonas settled beside her, taking up the reins. "Town ain't friendly," he said, his voice low. "But you need proper things. Stay close to me." The wagon wheels crunched through patches of snow as they made their way down the mountain trail. Amelia watched Jonas's profile, noting how his eyes constantly scanned the path ahead, alert as a hawk. The scar on his face caught the morning light, a pale slash against his weathered skin. Silver Bluff looked different in the morning sun, less threatening than it had yesterday, but no more welcoming. As they rolled past the saloon, heads turned. Amelia heard the whispers start up like rustling leaves. "Ain't that the fat beggar girl? Look who's riding with old Hale." Mountain Man's lost his mind. Jonas acted like he couldn't hear them, but Amelia saw his hands tighten on the reins. He pulled the wagon up in front of Watkins' General Store, helping her down with the same careful strength he'd shown yesterday. The store bell jingled as they entered. "Mister." Watkins looked up from his ledger, his round face going still when he saw them. His eyes slid from Jonas to Amelia, then back again. He made no move to come out from behind his counter. "Need some things," Jonas said, his voice carrying in the quiet store. He started listing items. "Shoes. Soap. Got any second-hand shawls?" Watkins cleared his throat. "Might have. In the back." "Best check then," Jonas said. His tone was mild, but something in his steady gaze made Watkins hurry to comply. While they waited, Amelia studied the store's packed shelves, rows of tin cans, stacks of fabric, tools hanging from hooks. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had anything new. Even the thought of second-hand items made her heart beat faster. Watkins returned with an armload of goods. He set them on the counter without meeting their eyes, but his hands moved quick enough when Jonas laid down silver coins in payment. The shoes were sturdy, if worn, and the shawl was thick wool despite its faded color. The soap smelled of lye, harsh but clean. Amelia clutched the wrapped package to her chest as they stepped back outside. They hadn't gone 3 steps when a voice called out, "Brother Hale!" "A word, if you please." The preacher stood at the corner of the boardwalk, his black coat buttoned tight against the morning chill. His wife, who turned Amelia away just yesterday, was nowhere in sight. "Go on to the wagon," Jonas told Amelia softly. "I'll be there directly." Amelia did as she was told, but stayed within earshot. She watched as the preacher drew Jonas aside, speaking in low, urgent tones. "It's not right what you're doing," the preacher said. "That girl, her kind brings nothing but trouble. The Navajo blood in her veins is a curse on this town. You must see reason." Jonas went very still. When he spoke, his voice carried the bite of mountain frost. "The only curse I see is the poison coming from your mouth, preacher. You speak of Christian charity on Sundays, then spread hate come Monday morning?" "I speak only out of concern." "Keep your concern," Jonas cut him off, "and your warnings. God sees clearer than you do." He turned away, leaving the preacher sputtering on the boardwalk. But Amelia saw the tension in his shoulders as he approached the wagon. She knew that look. The weight of standing alone against others' judgment. Their next stop was the livery stable, where Jonas needed horse feed. As he discussed prices with the stable master, Voices drifted from the back of the barn. Amelia recognized the sharp eastern accent of railroad agent Crowder before she saw him. "The spring's already ours," Crowder was saying to someone. "That prospector sold us the rights before he died. Just need to find the exact location." "What about that ledger his daughter carries?" another voice asked. "Let me worry about that. One way or another, we'll have what we need." Jonas appeared suddenly at Amelia's side, his hand gentle but firm on her elbow. "Time to go," he said quietly. He helped her into the wagon and had them moving before Crowder emerged from the barn. The ride home was silent, both of them lost in thought. The winter sun was starting its early descent by the time they reached the cabin. Jonas built up the fire while Amelia put away their purchases, each movement careful, like she still couldn't believe these simple things belonged to her. "Come here," Jonas said when the fire was crackling steady. He picked up an axe and led her to the woodpile outside. "Time you learned something useful." He showed her how to split kindling, how to stand, how to hold the axe, how to aim for the grain of the wood. Her first few attempts went wild, the axe barely marking the log. But Jonas was patient, adjusting her grip, showing her again and again. When she finally split a piece clean through, the crack of success startled a laugh out of her. The sound seemed to surprise them both, bright and awkward and real. She tried again, and this time her laugh came easier, when the wood split true. Jonas watched her, something softening in his scarred face. The cabin had known only silence for so long. Now it rang with the sound of axe meeting wood, of achievement, of a girl's halting laughter learning to be free. They worked until the light began to fade, building up a good pile of kindling. Amelia's arms ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from useful work, from learning something new. Her laughter had faded to a quiet smile, but it lingered in her eyes as she helped Jonas carry the wood inside. The cabin felt different now, warmer somehow, despite the gathering dark outside. As Jonas stirred up the fire, Amelia touched her new shawl, the soap, the sturdy shoes. Simple things, but they meant something more. Someone seeing her worth, standing up for her, teaching her to stand strong herself. But she remembered the railroad men's voices in the barn, the threat in their words. The ledger seemed to burn where she'd hidden it under her thin mattress. She looked at Jonas, wondering if he'd heard them too, if that was why he'd hurried them away so quick. He caught her looking and nodded once, as if reading her thoughts. There would be time for warnings later, his eyes seemed to say. For now, the fire was warm, the cabin was safe, and the sound of her laughter still echoed in its walls. The days settled into a rhythm at Jonas's cabin. Each morning brought new tasks, and with them, new chances for Amelia to prove her worth. Jonas showed endless patience as he taught her the skills needed to survive in the mountain country. "Watch how I do this," he'd say, demonstrating how to haul water from the creek. The wooden yoke settled heavy across his shoulders, buckets swaying in perfect balance as he walked. When it was Amelia's turn, water sloshed everywhere, soaking her skirts. But Jonas never laughed at her struggles. "Try again," he'd encourage softly. "Keep your back straight, small steps." By the third day, she could make it all the way to the cabin, with only a little spillage. Her arms ached, but pride bloomed in her chest at Jonas's approving nod. Mending came next. Jonas pulled out a pile of torn shirts, showing her how to thread a needle and make neat stitches. Her fingers, clumsy at first, grew more confident with each repair. The quiet hours by the fire, needle rising and falling, brought a peace she hadn't known in months. "My Sarah taught me this," Jonas said one evening, demonstrating how to patch a hole. "Said every mountain man should know how to keep his clothes together." His voice grew soft when he spoke of Sarah, though he didn't say more just then. The rabbit snares proved trickier. Jonas took her into the woods, showing her where to look for rabbit trails and how to set the wire loops just so. Her first attempts caught nothing but leaves, but Jonas helped her adjust the placement until finally, on the fourth morning, they found success. "Well done," he said simply, but his words filled her heart. When Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, Jonas surprised her by saying, "Best get ready for church." Amelia's stomach knotted with fear. I don't have anything proper to wear." "The Lord doesn't care about proper," Jonas replied, but he pulled out a clean shirt for himself and helped her wash her face and smooth her hair. The little church sat on the edge of town, its white painted boards bright in the morning Sunday. Amelia's legs trembled as they approached. She could already see faces turning, mouths moving in whispered commentary. Jonas's hand settled warm on her shoulder. "Head high now," he murmured. "You've got as much right to be here as anyone." They entered together, his steady presence beside her as they found a pew near the back. The whispers followed them like autumn leaves skittering across the floor. The mountain man brought her. "Bold as brass, ain't they? Never thought I'd see the day." Amelia kept her eyes fixed forward, though her cheeks burned. The familiar shame tried to crush her, but Jonas's words echoed in her mind. "Head high now." The preacher took his place at the pulpit, the same man who'd warned Jonas about her days ago. His eyes swept the congregation, pausing briefly on their pew before he opened his Bible. "Today's sermon," he announced, "comes from Matthew 25, verse 40. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." The words pierced straight through Amelia's careful composure. She had been the least of these, hungry, desperate, alone. Tears welled up and spilled silently down her cheeks as the preacher spoke of Christian charity and God's love for the downtrodden. Jonas didn't move or speak, but his steady presence beside her felt like shelter in a storm. She wiped her tears with the edge of her shawl, trying to be discreet. As the congregation filed out after the service, most people gave them a wide berth, but one woman, older, dressed simply but neatly, approached them with purpose. "Mrs. Kellum," Jonas greeted her with a respectful nod. The widow's kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled at Amelia. Without fanfare, she pressed something warm into Amelia's hand. A fresh biscuit, still fragrant from the morning's baking. "Welcome to our church, child." "Mrs." Kellum said softly, then moved on before Amelia could find words to thank her. Amelia stared at the biscuit, this simple gift nearly overwhelming her. It wasn't just food. It was acknowledgement, acceptance, the first crack in the wall of isolation that had surrounded her. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Evening settled over the cabin as they shared a simple supper of beans and the precious biscuit, which Amelia carefully divided in two. As the fire burned low, Jonas began to speak, his voice rough with memory. "My Sarah was Cherokee," he said, staring into the flames. "Pretty as a summer morning, and twice as bright. Our boy, David, had her eyes." He paused, gathering strength. "Cholera took them both, 5 years ago. Town doctor wouldn't treat Indians, they said. Wouldn't even look at my boy." Amelia's heart ached for the pain in his voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Jonas nodded, still watching the fire. Been alone since then. Figured that's how it would stay. He looked at her then, his scarred face gentle. "Till now." The words Amelia had been holding back spilled out like water. "After Papa died, nobody wanted me. Too big, too dark, too much trouble," they said. "I tried to make myself smaller, invisible, but it didn't help." "You're wanted now," Jonas said firmly. "Don't need to make yourself smaller. Don't need to hide who you are." Fresh tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks, but these were different from the ones in church. These were healing tears, washing away years of hurt and rejection. The moment was broken by the sound of hoofbeats outside. A lone rider moving slow past the cabin. Jonas was on his feet in an instant, peering through a gap in the shutters. "Railroad scouts," he muttered, watching until the rider disappeared into the darkness. "Been seeing them more often lately." Amelia thought of her father's ledger, hidden beneath her mattress, and the spring it described. She knew the railroad men wouldn't give up easily, but for now, she held on to Jonas's words. "You're wanted now." After so long alone, she finally belonged somewhere. Someone saw her worth, not just her flaws, and maybe, Just maybe, others like Mrs. Kellum would begin to see it too. The fire crackled low, casting warm shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, the rider's hoofbeats faded into the night, but inside, something new had taken root. Something like hope, something like family. The morning dawned bitter cold, frost coating every surface like diamond dust. Jonas stood at the cabin door, studying the steel-gray sky with worried eyes. Winter was settling in fast, earlier than usual. If they were going to find the spring marked in Amelia's ledger, it had to be now. Inside, he found Amelia already up, stoking the potbelly stove. "We need to make a journey," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "That spring your pa marked. We ought to see it with our own eyes before the railroad men get any ideas." Amelia's hand stilled on the poker. "How far is it?" 3 days' ride, maybe 4 with the weather. Jonas pulled out his worn trail map, spreading it across the table. "High country's treacherous this time of year, but we can't wait for spring." Fear flickered across Amelia's face. I don't know how to ride." Jonas nodded, understanding her worry. "We'll fix that today. Got a gentle mare that'll suit you fine." They spent that morning in the barn, where Jonas introduced Amelia to a stocky bay mare named Maple. The horse's brown eyes were kind, her disposition calm as Jonas showed Amelia how to approach without startling her. "Easy now," he instructed, demonstrating how to offer her palm flat with a handful of oats. "Let her know you're friend, not foe." Maple's velvet lips tickled Amelia's hand as she took the treat. A small smile tugged at the girl's mouth, the first real smile Jonas had seen from her in days. The actual mounting proved more challenging. Amelia's cheeks burned red as she struggled with the stirrup, her weight making it difficult to swing up. But Jonas never showed impatience, never made her feel shame. "Take your time," he said quietly. "Ain't no rush, just find your balance." It took several attempts, but finally Amelia settled into the saddle, gripping the horn white-knuckled. Jonas adjusted the stirrups, showing her how to sit straight and hold the reins properly. "There now," he said with satisfaction. "Natural as breathing, once you get the feel of it." They practiced in the clearing behind the barn until Amelia could walk and stop with reasonable confidence. Her thighs ached fiercely, but pride bloomed in her chest when Jonas declared her ready for the trail. The next morning, they set out before dawn. Jonas had packed 2 horses with supplies: dried beef, coffee, beans, extra blankets, and tools they might need. Amelia's ledger rode safely wrapped in oilcloth in her saddlebag. The first few hours were slow going. Amelia struggled to keep her seat on the steeper sections of trail, and every muscle in her body protested the unfamiliar movement. But Jonas never pushed ahead, keeping Maple's lead rope in hand and matching her pace exactly. "You're doing fine," he would say whenever he noticed her flagging. "Just keep your back straight and your eyes forward." They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, the horses ground, tied nearby. Jonas showed Amelia how to gather dry kindling from under fallen logs where the wood stayed protected from snow. Soon, a small fire crackled, driving back the darkness. They shared jerky and hot coffee, the bitter drink warming Amelia's insides. Above them, stars pricked through gaps in the pine boughs, sharp and brilliant in the mountain air. "Never seen stars so bright," Amelia murmured, wrapping her blanket tighter. Jonas nodded. "Up here, everything's closer to heaven." The second day brought deeper snow and steeper trails. Amelia's thighs burned with every step, but she set her jaw and endured. When they stopped to rest the horses, Jonas showed her how to read trail signs, broken twigs, disturbed stones, the different tracks of deer and rabbit in the snow. "Your pa would have known these signs," he said quietly. "Prospectors learn to read the land, or they don't survive long." Amelia touched her father's ledger through her coat. "Did you know him?" "Not well, but I remember him as an honest man. Kept to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings." Jonas paused, adding softly, "He'd be proud of you, making this journey." That night, huddled close to their fire, Amelia felt different somehow. The aches in her muscles weren't just pain anymore. They were proof she could endure. Each mile traveled, each skill learned, built something new inside her, something stronger. The third morning broke sharp and cold, frost crackling under their horses' hooves. They began climbing a long ridge, the trail switching back and forth across the steep face. Amelia's breath came in white puffs, but she kept Maple moving steady, just as Jonas had taught her. Near midday, they finally crested the ridge. Jonas drew his horse to a halt, and Amelia pulled up beside him. Below them, in a natural bowl of land, lay their goal. The spring bubbled up from between rocks, its waters running clear even in the winter cold. Steam rose from the surface where the warm water met freezing air, creating a mystical haze. They dismounted carefully, picking their way down to the water's edge. Jonas knelt, scooping the crystal water in his calloused hands. "Pure as mercy," he declared after tasting it. Sweet and strong, good water, the kind that could green up a whole valley. Amelia knelt beside him, touching the surface with trembling fingers. The water felt alive somehow, vital, even in winter's grip. She thought of her father finding this place, marking it so carefully in his ledger, hoping it would provide for his daughter's future. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered, her words forming white mist in the cold air. "Thank you for this gift." Jonas pulled out paper and pencil, helping Amelia record careful notes about landmarks. The lightning-struck pine on the ridge, the three-peaked mountain to the north, the distinctive rock formation shaped like a bear's head. They paced out the spring's dimensions and noted how the water flowed away down the valley. The sun was lowering by the time they finished their survey. They made camp within sight of the spring, and Jonas built up a good fire against the deepening cold. As they sat wrapped in blankets, sharing the last of their coffee, Jonas spoke with quiet conviction. "This spring is yours by right," he said, his scarred face serious in the firelight. "Your pa left it to you fair and square, marked in that ledger, and I'll see it stays yours." Amelia met his steady gaze, seeing the promise there. This man, who had lifted her from the streets, taught her to ride, showed her how to endure, he would stand between her and any who tried to take her inheritance. The spring bubbled softly in the gathering dark, its voice like a song of hope. For the first time since her father's death, Amelia felt the future held more promise than fear. The journey back should have been easier, with the spring found and their mission accomplished. But the mountain weather had other plans. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them a bitter wind that cut through clothing like knives of ice. "Storm's coming," Jonas called over the rising gust. "Need to find shelter before it hits full force." Amelia hunched lower in her saddle, her fingers numb despite her wool gloves. The temperature had dropped sharply in the past hour, and now the first flakes of snow began to swirl around them, dancing like angry spirits in the wind. The snow squall struck with shocking suddenness. One moment they could see the trail. The next, they were engulfed in a world of white. The wind howled through the pines, driving snow and ice horizontally across their path. Maple snorted in distress, and even Jonas's usually steady mount tossed its head against the stinging pellets of ice. "Stay close," Jonas shouted above the wind. He guided his horse closer to Amelia's, reaching out to grab Maple's lead rope. "There's some rocks up ahead. Might find shelter there." Amelia could barely see through the curtain of white, but she trusted Jonas completely. The horses picked their way carefully forward, their hooves crunching through fresh snow. The wind grew fiercer, and Amelia began to shiver violently. Jonas noticed. Without hesitation, he reined in both horses and dismounted. Despite Amelia's protests, he stripped off his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, leaving himself in just his wool shirt and vest. "But you'll freeze." Amelia tried to give it back, but Jonas wouldn't hear of it. "Been through worse," he said gruffly, though his teeth were already beginning to chatter. "Just a little further now." They pressed on through the howling storm. Jonas led both horses on foot, his broad shoulders bent against the wind. Finally, through the whiteout, Amelia saw the looming shape of a rock face. Jonas guided them along its base until he found what he was looking for. a deep overhang that offered some protection from the driving snow. They worked quickly to make camp, Jonas's hands shaking as he unsaddled the horses and set up what shelter he could with their blankets and tarps. The overhang was just deep enough to keep off the worst of the snow, though the wind still swirled around them. "Need to get warm," Jonas muttered, his lips turning blue. He gathered what dry wood he could find under the overhang and, with fingers stiff from cold, managed to start a small fire. The flame was pitiful against the vast white darkness of the storm, but it was something. Amelia watched in growing concern as Jonas continued to shiver. Without a word, she opened his buffalo coat and moved closer to him, sharing its warmth. For a moment he stiffened, unused to such closeness, but survival won out over awkwardness. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and together they huddled near the struggling fire. "Thank you," Amelia whispered, "for giving me your coat." Jonas just grunted, but his arm tightened protectively around her. Through the long night, they stayed that way, sharing warmth and watching the storm rage beyond their shelter. Sometimes Jonas would tell stories to keep their spirits up, tales of other storms he'd weathered, other close calls in the mountains. Amelia listened, drawing comfort from his steady voice and presence. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed under a thick blanket of fresh snow. They set out early, Jonas still refusing to take back his coat despite Amelia's protests. The going was slower now, with the horses having to break trail through deep drifts, but Jonas seemed confident of their direction. It was late afternoon when they finally caught sight of the cabin. Jonas was the first to notice something wrong. He reined in sharply, his face going hard as stone. "No," he whispered, then spurred his horse forward. Smoke rose from the cabin's roof, but not the welcoming smoke of a home fire. This was the bitter, acrid smoke of destruction. As they drew closer, Amelia's heart seemed to freeze in her chest. The cabin's door hung from one hinge, its windows black holes in walls, scorched by flames. The roof had partially collapsed, and everything inside was either burned or broken. Amelia slid from her saddle and ran toward the ruins, Jonas close behind. Inside, destruction was total. The bed was a heap of charred wood, the shelves torn from the walls. Her few precious belongings, the dress Jonas had bought her, the hair ribbon Mrs. Kellum had given her, all were reduced to ash. With trembling hands, she searched through the wreckage for her father's ledger. But she knew, even before Jonas's grim shake of his head, that it was gone. The railroad men had taken it, along with any proof of her claim to the spring. The realization broke something inside her. Amelia collapsed to her knees in the ashes, a wail of grief and loss tearing from her throat. All her father had left her, all the hope she'd begun to feel, gone, just like that. Jonas knelt beside her, his strong hands gripping her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. His face was fierce with contained anger, but his voice was gentle. "They can burn wood," he said firmly, "but not your worth, not what's in here." He touched her heart with one calloused finger. "That, spring is yours by right, ledger or no ledger. And we ain't beaten yet." Amelia wanted to believe him, but shame and guilt overwhelmed her. "I've brought you nothing but trouble," she sobbed. "Your home, everything you had." "Home's not just walls and a roof," Jonas cut her off. "It's people, family, and you're my family now, whether you like it or not." As darkness fell, Jonas led them to Mrs. Kellum's farm on the outskirts of town. The widow took one look at their faces and the ash on their clothes, and understanding dawned in her kind eyes. "The barn's warm," she said without hesitation. "There's clean hay in the loft, and I'll bring you some supper." That night, wrapped in borrowed quilts in the sweet-smelling hay, Amelia lay awake listening to the quiet sounds of the barn. Horses shuffling below, wind in the eaves, Jonas's steady breathing nearby. Her heart ached with a mixture of loss and unworthiness. "Jonas," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm sorry I brought this curse on you." There was a long pause, then the sound of Jonas sitting up. "Look at me, girl," he said, his voice firm in the darkness. "You ain't no curse. You're a blessing. Those men who burned our home, They're the only curse I see. And come morning, we start rebuilding. That's what folks do out here. We get knocked down, we get back up. But the ledger, papers burn, Jonas said simply. Truth don't. We saw that spring with our own eyes, marked its location in our heads. More importantly, we got witnesses who've seen that ledger, Mrs. Kellum for one. Railroad men might think they've won, but they don't know us very well. His words carried the weight of promise, of determination that wouldn't be shaken. Amelia felt something of his strength seep into her own spirit, pushing back against despair. Get some rest, Jonas said softly. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure our next move. As Amelia drifted toward sleep, she heard Jonas moving quietly in the darkness, checking the barn doors, making sure they were secure. Even now, even with everything lost, he was still protecting her, still believing in her worth when she struggled to believe it herself. Outside, a coyote called lonely into the night, and somewhere in town, the railroad men might be congratulating themselves on their victory. But here in the warm darkness of the barn, Amelia felt something unexpected take root in her heart. Not just survival, but defiance. They might have burned her proof, but they couldn't burn away her truth, or the family she'd found in this scarred, gentle man who refused to let her give up. Word of the stolen ledger spread through Silver Bluff like wildfire. By noon the next day, Railroad Agent Crowder strode down the main street, waving the worn book above his head for all to see. A crowd gathered as he stopped in front of the marshal's office, his polished boots gleaming in the winter Sunday. "Good people of Silver Bluff," he announced, his voice carrying across the street. The railroad now legally owns the High Country Spring. This document proves the previous owner sold all rights to the Western Pacific Railroad Company. He held up Amelia's father's ledger, its pages fluttering in the cold breeze. Marshal Moore stood on his office porch, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. His weathered face showed no emotion as Crowder continued his speech about progress and prosperity the railroad would bring. The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. At the edge of town, Jonas and Amelia watched from the shelter of Mrs. Kellum's barn. Jonas's jaw tightened as he saw how Crowder brandished the ledger. The last piece of Amelia's father now turned against her. "That ain't right, Mrs." Kellum muttered, standing beside them with her arms crossed. "Stealing from a child, then crowing about it like some proud rooster." Later that afternoon, Marshal Moore rode out to Mrs. Kellum's farm. He dismounted slowly, his spurs jingling in the quiet yard. Jonas met him at the barn door, positioning himself between the lawman and where Amelia worked inside. "Jonas," the marshal began, removing his hat, "I'm here as a friend. You need to back down from this fight." "Ain't no fight, Thaddeus," Jonas replied evenly. "Just a matter of truth against lies." The marshal sighed, scuffing his boot in the dirt. "Railroad's got the paper. They've got the law. And they've got means you don't want to reckon with." He lowered his voice. "I've seen what happens to folks who stand against them. Don't put yourself, or that girl, through that." Inside the barn, Amelia's hands trembled as she gathered eggs, listening to the men's conversation. Each word from the marshal hammered home her shame. She had brought this trouble on Jonas, on kind Mrs. Kellum. Perhaps it would be better if she just disappeared. Jonas's voice cut through her thoughts, firm and clear. "Way I see it, Marshal. A man who stands by, while thieves rob an orphan girl ain't much of a lawman at all." The marshal's face hardened. "That's my final warning, Jonas. Don't make me choose between friendship and duty." He turned and mounted up, riding away without another word. That evening, after a simple supper of Mrs. Kellum's soup, Jonas announced he would ride to the county courthouse in Cedar Ridge, a 3-day journey. "Got to file your claim proper," he told Amelia. "Get the truth down on paper before they bury it completely." Amelia watched anxiously as he prepared for the journey, checking his saddlebags and weapons. "What if they don't believe you?" she asked softly. Jonas paused in his preparations. "Truth's got a way of being heard," he said. "Just got to find the right ears to hear it." "Mrs." Kellum stepped forward with a package wrapped in cloth. "Some biscuits and jerky for the trail," she said. And Jonas, be careful. Railroad men might try to stop you from reaching Cedar Ridge. Dawn was just breaking when Jonas rode out, the morning star still bright in the pale sky. Amelia stood watching until he disappeared over the ridge, fighting back tears. Mrs. Kellum put a gentle arm around her shoulders. "Come on, child," she said. "Idle hands just feed worry. Let's keep busy till he returns." Over the next 3 days, Amelia threw herself into farm work, trying to be useful. She mended clothes with careful stitches, though her fingers were clumsy with the needle. She fed Mrs. Kellum's chickens, gathered eggs, and helped clean the house. But shame followed her like a shadow. In town, people who had once merely ignored her now actively avoided her. When she accompanied Mrs. Kellum to the general store, conversations stopped. Mothers pulled their children away. Even the preacher crossed the street rather than pass near her. "Don't let it trouble you," Mrs. Kellum said firmly. "They're just scared of the railroad's shadow. Fear makes folks forget their Christian charity." But at night, lying in the hayloft, Amelia felt the full weight of her situation. She was native, unwanted, and now labeled a troublemaker. The railroad men had stolen her only proof of ownership, and even the law turned its back. In the darkness, she whispered prayers into her pillow. "Dear God," she breathed, "do you still remember me? Or am I too much trouble for you too?" The only answer was the soft whicker of horses below and the distant howl of a coyote. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Jonas returned. Amelia saw him first, running out to meet him as he rode slowly into the yard. One look at his face told her everything. "They wouldn't even look at our claim," he said later, sitting heavily at Mrs. Kellum's kitchen table. Said the railroad already registered the spring 2 days ago, had all their papers in order, witnesses signed and everything. His hands clenched into fists. "It's all fixed. They've got judges and clerks bought and paid for." Mrs. Kellum set a cup of coffee before him. "The law ain't always just," she said quietly. "But the Lord sees everything." Amelia stood in the doorway, her heart sinking. Maybe we should just give up," she whispered. "Let them have the spring. I'm not worth all this trouble." Jonas's head snapped up, his eyes fierce. "Don't you ever say that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Paper doesn't make truth. A lie written down 1,000 times is still a lie." He stood, crossing to her in 2 strides. "You're my family now, and we'll find another way. You hear me?" Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks as she nodded. That night, back in the barn loft, she again whispered prayers into the darkness. But this time, they were not just for herself. She prayed for Jonas's safety, for Mrs. Kellum's kindness, for strength to face whatever came next. The stolen ledger might have given the railroad their paper victory, but as Amelia drifted off to sleep, she held on to Jonas's words like a lifeline. Paper doesn't make truth, and family, she was learning, was stronger than any document. The crack of Jonas's axe echoed through the pines as he shaped another log for the new cabin. Sweat gleamed on his forehead despite the winter chill. The old foundation remained, a blackened rectangle in the snow where his home had stood for 15 years. Now, fresh-cut logs lay in neat rows, ready to rise again. Amelia trudged through the snow, carrying an armload of nails in her apron. Her breath came in heavy puffs, her round face flushed from exertion. She had already made 3 trips from Mrs. Kellum's wagon to the building site, and her arms trembled with fatigue. "Set them right there," Jonas directed, pointing with his chin. He noticed her labored breathing but kept his voice encouraging. "You're doing fine work, girl. Every nail counts." Amelia carefully placed the nails beside his tool chest, then straightened slowly, pressing one hand against her aching back. She wished she was stronger, more helpful. Jonas worked tirelessly from sunup to sundown, while she could barely carry a few pounds without resting. "Time to stack them logs I've hewn," Jonas said, driving his axe into a stump. "We'll work together. You guide the end while I lift." The first log was massive, and Amelia's arms shook as she tried to help position it. Her fingers slipped on the rough bark, and she stumbled backward into the snow. Shame burned her cheeks as she scrambled up. "No harm done," Jonas said quietly. "Try again," This time, just steady it. Let me do the heavy lifting." They worked until dusk, making slow but steady progress. Though Amelia's contribution was small, Jonas praised each effort. "You've got grit," he told her as they walked back to Mrs. Kellum's barn for the night. "That matters more than muscle." Sunday morning dawned, clear and cold. Jonas and Amelia rode into town in Mrs. Kellum's wagon, headed for the white-painted church that stood like a finger pointing to heaven. Amelia wore her cleanest dress, though it was still threadbare. Her stomach churned as they climbed the steps, remembering the whispers and stares from their last visit. The congregation fell silent as they entered, heads turning to watch them take seats in the back pew. Mrs. Kellum joined them, her chin held high, daring anyone to comment. The piano wheezed out the opening hymn, and voices rose in worship, though some nearby parishioners sang noticeably softer. Reverend Clark took his place behind the pulpit, his black coat severe against the whitewashed wall. His sermon text was Romans 13, submission to governing authorities. As he spoke, his eyes frequently strayed to where Jonas and Amelia Saturday. "In these trying times," the preacher declared, his voice swelling, "we must remember that defying lawful men is defying God's ordained order. Those who resist authority bring judgment upon themselves." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Several people nodded firmly, while others studied their hands. The marshal's wife smiled tightly from her front row seat. Jonas stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. All eyes turned to him as he faced the congregation, his scarred face solemn in the light filtering through the windows. "Begging your pardon, Reverend," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly. "But there's a higher law than man's. When Pharaoh ordered midwives to kill Hebrew babies, they chose God's justice instead. When Daniel faced the lion's den for praying, he chose God's law over the king's." He paused, looking around the church. Some faces showed anger, others uncertainty. A few, mostly older folks who remembered different hard times, nodded slowly. "Justice," Jonas continued, "ain't just what's written on paper. It's what's written on the heart by the Almighty Himself. And taking an orphan girl's inheritance through theft and lies, that goes against God's justice, no matter how legal men make it seem." Reverend Clark's face flushed red. "This is not the place for personal grievances, Mr. Hale." "Ain't no better place," Jonas replied firmly. "Ain't this where we're supposed to speak truth and seek righteousness?" Amelia sat straight-backed through it all, her heart pounding. Though shame still pulled at her, she felt something else rising. Pride in Jonas's words, courage in his unflinching defense of her. For the first time, she didn't try to make herself smaller under the townspeople's stares. The rest of the service passed in tense silence. Afterward, people hurried past them on the church steps, though a few, including old Mr. Peterson from the livery, paused to shake Jonas's hand. The preacher watched from the doorway, his expression stormy. That evening, back at the construction site, Jonas built a small fire. The newly laid cabin logs cast long shadows in the flickering light. Amelia sat close to the flames, wrapped in a blanket Mrs. Kellum had given her. The stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Jonas stared into the fire for a long time before speaking. When he did, his voice was soft, heavy with memory. "Had me a wife once," he began. "Sarah. She was Cherokee, beautiful as sunrise. Had us a little girl, too. We called her Rosa." He pulled something from his shirt pocket, a small leather pouch. From it, he withdrew a wooden pendant, carved with intricate patterns. "Sarah made this," he said, running his thumb over the designs. "Said it told our story. Man meets woman, they make a family, find peace." His voice caught. "We had 3 good years." Amelia leaned closer, drawn by the raw emotion in his words. The firelight caught the tears in his eyes. "Cholera came through in 58, he continued. "Hit the town hard. Sarah and Rosa got sick. I tried to get help, but..." His hands clenched around the pendant. "Folks wouldn't come near us. Doctor refused to treat savages, he said. Town minister wouldn't even pray over them. Tears rolled down Amelia's cheeks as Jonas spoke. She saw her own pain reflected in his story. The sting of rejection, the cruelty of prejudice, the crushing weight of being deemed less than human. I buried them up there. Jonas gestured toward the hills. Under the big pine where Rosa liked to play. Carved their names in Cherokee like Sarah taught me. Some folks said I cursed the ground by doing that. He shook his head slowly. Wanted to hate them all. Nearly did. But hate's a poison that kills the one carrying it. Amelia wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Is that why you helped me? She whispered. Because I'm part Indian too? Jonas reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he said softly. Maybe he knew we both needed healing. When I saw you there, hungry and alone, something spoke to my heart clear as dawn. Here's your second chance, Jonas. Here's someone else who needs love. Same as you once did. The fire crackled between them as Jonas's words sank in. Amelia felt the truth of them in her bones. They were both wounded souls, both outsiders who had found each other. More than that, they were becoming family. The Lord gave me another chance, in you, Jonas whispered, squeezing her hand. And I aim to do right by it this time. Won't let no one drive us out or shame us into silence. We'll stand together, you and me. Amelia nodded, unable to speak through her tears. But her heart felt fuller than it had since her father died. She wasn't just the unwanted girl anymore. She was chosen, claimed, and loved. They sat together by the fire until the stars fully emerged, their shared pain slowly transforming into shared strength. The new cabin's walls rose dark against the night sky, not just a shelter, but a symbol of their determination to build something lasting from the ashes of the past. Heavy snow blanketed the countryside, transforming the landscape into a pristine white wilderness. For days, thick clouds spilled their frozen bounty, blocking the trails and forcing the town into stillness. In Mrs. Kellum's barn, Jonas and Amelia found unexpected peace in their temporary shelter, grateful for the widow's quiet kindness. The barn was warmer than expected, its thick walls blocking the bitter wind. Fresh hay cushioned their sleeping pallets, and the presence of Mrs. Kellum's 2 cows and old mare added welcome warmth. Each morning, the widow would appear with a basket of food, fresh bread, preserved fruits, sometimes even eggs when her hens were productive. The Lord provides, she would say simply, brushing aside their thanks. Her weathered face would soften as she watched Amelia carefully organize their meager belongings, trying to keep the barn tidy despite their presence. During these snowbound days, Jonas decided it was time for Amelia to learn her letters. Each afternoon, as winter light filtered through the barn's high windows, they sat together on bales of hay. Jonas would open his old Bible, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. Here, he would say, pointing to simple words. Start with these. Amelia's fingers trembled as she traced the letters. She had always felt shame at her inability to read, but Jonas's patience never wavered. He guided her through each word, explaining how letters combined to make sounds. H-O-P-E, she sounded out one day, her face brightening with recognition. Hope, Jonas nodded, his scarred face creasing in a smile. That's right. Now try this one. F-A-I-T-H, she worked through carefully. Faith. You're getting stronger at this, Jonas praised. Just like everything else, takes practice and persistence. Amelia beamed at his words, though her cheeks flushed with pleasure. Each new word felt like a small victory, another step away from helplessness. She practiced whenever she could, mouthing words silently as she did her chores. The peaceful routine shattered one night as heavy hoofbeats approached through the darkness. Jonas was alert instantly, grabbing his rifle from beside his pallet. Amelia sat up, her heart pounding as multiple horses circled the barn. Stay low, Jonas whispered, moving to the barn door. He had positioned lanterns strategically days ago, prepared for such a moment. Now he lit one with steady hands, holding it high as he cracked open the door. The lamplight revealed 5 mounted men, their faces obscured by scarves. Railroad enforcers hired guns sent to intimidate those who stood in the company's way. Their horses shifted restlessly in the snow, steam rising from their flanks. "Clear out, Hale," one man called. "Take the half-breed and go. This ain't your fight." Jonas's voice was steel. "Any man steps closer answers to this rifle. I've got good position and better aim. Reckon some of you won't ride away." The threat hung in the frozen air. Amelia could see Jonas's finger steady on the trigger, though she knew he hoped not to use it. Violence meant trouble with the law, which was exactly what the railroad wanted. After a tense moment, the lead rider wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over," he spat, before the group galloped away into the darkness. Jonas kept watch until their hoofbeats faded, then secured the door. When he turned back, his face was grim in the lamplight. Amelia sat huddled in her blankets, shaking not from cold but from realization. "They want to kill me," she whispered. Jonas set down his rifle and knelt beside her. "No, child. They want to scare you into running, but we ain't running." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Amelia waited until they had finished their breakfast of Mrs. Kellum's biscuits before speaking her mind. "I need to learn to shoot," she said firmly. Jonas looked up sharply. "Now, Amelia." "Please," she interrupted. "I can't just hide behind you forever. What if something happens to you? What if they come when you're not here?" Her words hung in the frosty air. Jonas studied her face for a long moment, seeing not just the frightened girl he'd rescued, but someone determined to stand her ground. "All right," he said finally. "But we do this proper." They waited until midday, when the sun had warmed the air slightly. Jonas led her to a sheltered spot behind the barn, where he had set up some cans on a fallen log. From his saddlebag, he withdrew his spare revolver, a well-maintained Colt. "First rule," he said seriously, "is respect. This ain't a toy. It's a tool that can take life. You treat it careful, always." Amelia nodded solemnly as Jonas showed her how to check if the gun was loaded, how to hold it properly, how to aim along the barrel. Her hands felt clumsy on the weapon, its weight unfamiliar and awkward. "Stand firm," Jonas instructed, adjusting her stance. "Gun'll kick when it fires. You need to be ready for that." The first shot went wide, making Amelia flinch. The second wasn't much better. But she kept at it, her face set with determination. By the end of the afternoon, she had managed to hit 2 cans, though not consistently. "It's a start," Jonas said encouragingly. "We'll practice more tomorrow." That evening, as they sat in the lantern-lit barn, Amelia ran her fingers over the Bible's pages, picking out words she now recognized. The weapon practice had awakened something in her. Not a love of guns, but a sense of capability she had never known before. "I don't want to hide anymore," she whispered, looking up at Jonas. "I want to stand, like you taught me." Jonas nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. "Standing takes courage," he said. "But you've got plenty of that. I've seen it since the day I met you." Amelia smiled softly, remembering that cold afternoon when Jonas had lifted her from the snow and changed her life forever. She was no longer that helpless girl. With each passing day, learning to read, learning to shoot, learning to believe in herself, she was becoming stronger. Outside, the wind whistled through the winter night, but inside the barn, hope burned as warm as the lantern's flame. Amelia knew there would be more challenges ahead, more threats from the railroad men, more battles to fight. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face them. Mrs. Kellum's rooster crowed in the distance, heralding another day. Amelia straightened her shoulders, ready for more practice, with both books and guns. She was done being the victim. It was time to become the person Jonas believed she could be. The late February thaw came suddenly, turning frozen ground to mud and crystalline snow to brown slush. Water dripped steadily from pine boughs and cabin eaves, marking winter's retreat. Jonas stood in the doorway of Mrs. Kellum's barn, studying the softening earth and the heavy clouds that promised more rain. "Time we started making our case to the neighbors," he told Amelia as she finished her morning chores. Folks need to know what that spring could mean for their land. Amelia nodded, though her stomach knotted at the thought of facing more strangers. She had grown comfortable with Jonas and Mrs. Kellum, but the wider world still filled her with dread. They set out the next morning on Jonas's 2 horses, her mount carefully picking its way through the mud. Jonas had taught her to ride better over the winter months, but she still gripped the saddle horn tightly when the trail grew steep or slippery. Their first stop was the Peterson place, a small ranch nestled in a narrow valley. The family's cattle looked thin after the harsh winter, and their stock pond was nearly dry. Jonas explained how the spring could provide water for all the surrounding farms, if only it remained free from railroad control. Mr. Peterson listened politely, but his eyes kept darting to Amelia, who stood slightly behind Jonas, trying to make herself smaller. When Jonas finished speaking, Peterson shook his head. "Ain't worth crossing the railroad, Hale. They'd ruin us sure as sunrise." Amelia opened her mouth to speak, to explain how her father had discovered the spring, but the words stuck in her throat. Peterson's wife watched from the doorway, lips pressed thin with disapproval. As they rode away, Jonas noticed Amelia's slumped shoulders. "You ain't to blame for their fear," he said gently. "Fear's what gives men like Crowder their power." They visited 3 more homesteads that day, receiving similar responses. Some farmers showed interest in the spring but balked at standing against the railroad. Others barely let Jonas finish speaking before turning them away. At the Morgan place, a prosperous sheep ranch, Amelia finally found her voice. As Jonas described the spring's location, she stepped forward. "My father found it," she said, her words quiet but clear. "He meant it for everyone's use, not just the railroad's profit." "Mrs." Morgan's face softened slightly at this, but her husband quickly spoke up. "Don't matter none now, girl. Railroad's got the paper, and paper's what counts." That evening, they made camp beneath a blankser grove of old cottonwoods. The early spring air held a lingering chill, and Jonas built a small fire. Amelia sat close to the flames, wrapped in her blanket, trying not to let disappointment crush her spirit. "Saw something today," Jonas said as he stirred their supper of beans and salt pork. "When you spoke up at Morgan's place," Amelia ducked her head. "Didn't do any good, though." "Wasn't about whether it worked," Jonas replied. "Was about you finding your voice. Ain't many would have had the courage after all you been through." He settled back against his saddle, studying her across the fire. "Most folks see what they expect to see, a scared girl, different from them. But I see what's growing in you. Strength, like a young tree reaching for light." Amelia felt her cheeks warm, and not from the fire. No one had ever spoken of her this way, as though she held something valuable inside. "I don't feel strong," she admitted softly. "Strength ain't always about feeling strong," Jonas said. "Sometimes it's just about standing up again after you fall. You've done that more times than most." They spent 3 more days riding to distant homesteads, each visit following a similar pattern. A few farmers offered sympathy, but no support. One woman slipped Amelia a loaf of fresh bread while her husband wasn't looking, but none would openly side with them against the railroad. As they turned their horses toward home, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The rain caught them an hour from town, soaking through their coats despite Jonas's oiled slicker stretched across both their shoulders. They found Mrs. Kellum in her kitchen, hands trembling as she tried to pour coffee. Her usually neat hair had come loose from its bun, and her eyes were red from crying. "What happened?" Jonas asked sharply, helping her to a chair. "Railroad men," she whispered. 3 of them. Said I was harboring troublemakers. Said they'd burn my barn like they burned your cabin if I didn't turn you out." She looked up at them, anguish clear on her face. "I told them I answered to God, not them, but—" Her voice broke. Jonas's face hardened. "We'll go. Can't put you at risk any longer." "But the cabin ain't finished," Amelia protested. The walls were up, but the roof was only half done, and there were gaps between the logs that needed chinking. "We'll manage," Jonas said firmly. "Mrs. Kellum's done more than enough for us already." The widow reached out and caught Amelia's hand. I'm sorry, child. I'd keep you if I could, but… No, Amelia said, squeezing the older woman's fingers. Jonas is right. We can't let them hurt you, too. She straightened her shoulders, trying to show the strength Jonas claimed to see in her. We'll be all right. They gathered their few belongings quickly. Mrs. Kellum packed them food, bread, cheese, dried apples, despite their protests. As they prepared to leave, she pressed a small Bible into Amelia's hands. To help with your reading, she said softly, and to remember you're not alone. The half-built cabin was cold and damp when they arrived. Wind whistled through the gaps in the walls, and the partial roof leaked steadily, but it was theirs, a place to stand their ground. Jonas immediately began gathering wood for a fire, while Amelia spread their bedrolls in the driest corner. Neither spoke of their failed mission to rally support or of the increasing danger they faced. Instead, they worked together in comfortable silence, making the best of what they had. As darkness fell, Jonas managed to get a small fire going in the makeshift hearth. Its light cast dancing shadows on the rough walls, making the cabin feel almost cozy despite its incompleteness. Amelia sat close to the flames, Mrs. Kellum's Bible open in her lap. She slowly sounded out words, gaining confidence with each page. Jonas listened as he worked on patching a hole in the roof, nodding encouragement when she looked up. She was no longer the same girl who had huddled on Silver Bluff streets, begging for scraps. That girl had believed herself worthless, unwanted. But Jonas's faith in her, Mrs. Kellum's kindness, and even the railroad's threats had shown her something different. She was worth fighting for, worth standing beside. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside their rough shelter, Amelia felt a warm certainty grow. She might still stumble over words, still shake when strangers stared, still doubt herself in dark moments. But she was no longer just running from the railroad or hiding behind Jonas. She was part of this fight, their fight, for justice and dignity. Jonas finished his work and settled beside her near the fire. Neither spoke of their fears about the days ahead. Instead, they shared Mrs. Kellum's bread and listened to the rain, two survivors making their stand together. Dawn light filtered through the gaps in the unfinished walls as Jonas and Amelia fell into their daily routine. The sound of Jonas's axe rang steady through the crisp morning air, while Amelia gathered kindling, her arms full of dried twigs and pine branches. Though still awkward in her movements, she worked with growing confidence. The cabin, half rebuilt after the railroad men's destruction, slowly took shape under their combined efforts. Jonas showed Amelia how to mix mud and straw for chinking between the logs, filling the gaps that let in cold wind. Her first attempts were messy, but Jonas nodded approval at her persistence. "Ain't about being perfect," he said, demonstrating how to smooth the mixture. "Just about keeping out the weather." They worked through the morning, Jonas up on the roof laying fresh shingles while Amelia handed them up one by one. The physical labor left her breathless, but she didn't complain. Each completed task felt like a small victory over those who'd tried to drive them away. By afternoon, they turned their attention to the chimney. Jonas had gathered flat stones from the creek bed, showing Amelia how to test each one for stability. Together, they stacked them carefully, securing them with mortar. "My father built chimneys," Amelia said softly, smoothing cement between two rocks. "Before he went prospecting, I used to watch him work." Jonas paused, giving her space to remember. These quiet moments of sharing had become more frequent between them, like tender shoots breaking through spring soil. As evening approached, they settled into their familiar routine. Amelia pumped water, while Jonas lit the lantern, its warm glow filling their simple home. Their supper was basic, beans and cornbread, but shared with comfortable conversation about the day's progress. The next morning, they heard hoofbeats approaching. A courier, dressed in a crisp uniform, dismounted with a letter bearing the railroad's elaborate seal. Jonas accepted it with narrowed eyes, breaking it open as Amelia watched anxiously. His face hardened as he read. Without a word, he held the paper so Amelia could see the railroad's offer, $500 to abandon their claim to the spring and leave the area. It was more money than Amelia had ever seen, enough to buy a proper house in town. Jonas looked directly at her, then deliberately tore the letter into tiny pieces. The fragments scattered in the morning breeze like snow. "You can't sell what God gives," he declared, his voice firm and clear. "That spring's meant for all, not just them that can pay." Amelia felt something shift inside her chest, like a weight lifting. Jonas could have taken the money, could have freed himself from all this trouble. Instead, he chose to stand with her, to fight for what was right. Sunday brought its own test of resolve. They hitched the wagon early, determined to attend services despite growing hostility in town. As they approached the white-painted church, Amelia heard the whispers clearly. "Taking in that beggar girl out of pity. Probably wants cheap help. Ain't natural, a man alone with." The words stung, but before Amelia could shrink away, Mrs. Kellum appeared beside them. The widow's chin was high as she took Amelia's arm, leading her to a pew near the front. The gesture spoke volumes, and the whispers died away. "Reckon some folks need reminding about Christian charity," Mrs. Kellum said, just loud enough to carry. The sermon that day was about Moses leading his people through the wilderness, sustained by water from a rock. Amelia couldn't help thinking about the spring, about her father finding it, about Jonas fighting to keep it free. Perhaps God's provision came in many forms. That evening, after their simple supper, Jonas did something unexpected. Instead of reading from his Bible as usual, he set it aside and turned to Amelia. "Time you learn to pray proper," he said gently. "Not just listening to others, but speaking your own heart." Amelia felt panic rise in her throat. I wouldn't know what to say." "Ain't about fancy words," Jonas assured her. "Just talk to him like you'd talk to someone who loves you, someone who sees all you are and all you could be." He knelt beside their rough-hewn table, and after a moment's hesitation, Amelia joined him. The lantern cast soft shadows as Jonas began. "Lord, we thank you for this day, for work to do and strength to do it. Thank you for sending this child to my care, though I ain't always sure I'm worthy of such trust." He squeezed Amelia's hand. "Your turn. Just speak what's in your heart." Amelia closed her eyes tight, her voice barely a whisper at first. "Dear God, She swallowed hard. "Thank you for Jonas, for giving me a home when I had none. Thank you for Mrs. Kellum's kindness." As she continued, her voice grew stronger. "Please help me be more than just a beggar girl. Help me be someone worth Jonas's faith in me, someone brave enough to fight for what's right." She felt Jonas's hand tighten on hers as she spoke. When she opened her eyes, she saw tears in his normally stoic face. "Child," he said roughly, "you already are so much more than a beggar. You're a daughter of the Most High, same as any, and you've shown more courage standing up to those railroad men than most folks manage in a lifetime." Amelia felt tears slip down her own cheeks, but for once they weren't tears of shame or fear. These were different, tears of belonging, of being truly seen and valued. They worked until sunset each day, their routine punctuated by small victories. The roof no longer leaked. The chimney drew smoke properly. The walls kept out most of the wind. It wasn't fancy, but it was becoming home. Each evening, they shared simple meals by lantern light, talking about their progress or reading from the Bible. And each night, Amelia offered her own prayers, her voice growing surer as she learned to claim her place as both Jonas's ward and God's child. The railroad's letter lay in ashes, but its memory strengthened their resolve. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves now, not just a spring, but justice itself. And in that fight, Amelia was no longer a burden to be carried, but a partner in the struggle. As she helped Jonas lay the last stones of the chimney, Amelia realized she was smiling. Her arms ached from the work, and her dress was smeared with mortar. But she felt something she'd never known before: pride. Not pride in how she looked, or what others thought of her, but pride in what she could do, in who she was becoming. Jonas must have noticed her expression. "Reckon that smile's worth more than any railroad money," he said quietly. Amelia nodded, touching the rough stones they'd laid together. "They tried to burn us out," she said, "but we're building something stronger." "That we are, child," Jonas agreed. "That we are." The first rays of dawn painted the mountain peaks in shades of amber when the sound of galloping hooves shattered the morning quiet. Jonas, already awake and tending the stove, grabbed his rifle. Amelia scrambled from her cot, heart pounding as she recognized the thunder of multiple horses passing their cabin. "Railroad men," Jonas growled, peering through the window. "Headed for the spring." Amelia's hands trembled as she pulled on her boots. "We have to stop them." Jonas nodded grimly, already saddling their horses. The morning air bit cold as they mounted up, following the fresh tracks through frost-covered grass. Amelia clutched her father's old knife, the one possession she'd managed to save from the cabin fire. Its worn handle felt warm against her palm, a connection to her past that gave her strength. They pushed their horses hard, climbing the familiar trail toward the spring. The sound of men's voices and hammering echoed through the trees before they caught sight of the water. When they broke through the tree line, Amelia's heart sank. 4 railroad men, led by a burly foreman, were driving a tall signpost into the frozen ground. The freshly painted sign declared, "Property of Western and Pacific Railroad. No trespassing," in bold black letters. Jonas dismounted first, his rifle ready but pointed down. "That don't belong to you," he called out, voice steady and firm. The men turned, hands dropping to their gun belts. The foreman spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the snow. "Got papers say different, mountain man. Best ride away while you can." "Papers stolen and forged," Jonas replied, taking a step forward. "This spring belongs to the girl's family." The men laughed, harsh and mocking. "That fat